I woke up that morning to the sound of industrial machinery rumbling outside my bedroom window, which was unusual considering it was barely 6 in the morning on a Saturday in Rochester, Minnesota. I stumbled out of bed, still groggy, and peered through the frost-covered glass to see a massive orange plow truck operated by the HOA making its third pass down our street. What caught my attention wasn't just the early hour, but the fact that the driver seemed to be deliberately angling the blade to push every bit of snow from the communal areas directly onto my driveway. My name is Nathan Vickers, and I had moved into this suburban neighborhood called Meadowbrook Estates about 8 months ago. The house was perfect, a beautiful 2-story colonial with a detached garage, and the price had been reasonable. What I hadn't accounted for was the nightmare that came with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The president, a woman named Patricia, had made my life miserable from day one. I threw on my winter coat over my pajamas and rushed outside, my boots crunching through the fresh snow on my porch. The cold Minnesota air hit my face like a slap, but I was too furious to care. My driveway, which I had meticulously cleared just yesterday afternoon, was now buried under what had to be at least 4 feet of compacted snow. The plow driver, a grizzled man in his 50s wearing an HOA contractor vest, saw me approaching and accelerated, making one final pass that deposited even more snow right at the entrance to my garage. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, waving my arms. The driver either didn't hear me or pretended not to, disappearing around the corner. I stood there in the freezing morning, staring at the mountain of snow that now completely blocked my driveway. I couldn't get my car out. I couldn't even walk to my mailbox without climbing over this mess. And I knew exactly why this had happened. 3 weeks ago, I had filed a formal complaint against the HOA. Patricia had issued me a violation notice because my fence was supposedly half an inch taller than the permitted height according to the covenants. Never mind that the fence had been installed by the previous owners and had existed for 15 years without issue. Never mind that I had measurements proving it was actually within regulations. Patricia wanted to assert her authority, and when I challenged her with documentation and photographs, she had turned red-faced and told me I would regret questioning her judgment. I pulled out my phone and took several photos and videos of my buried driveway, making sure to capture the timestamp and the fact that every other driveway on the street was clear. Then, I called the non-emergency police line to document the incident. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but explained that unless there was clear evidence of property damage or a safety hazard, this was a civil matter between me and the HOA. Next, I called Patricia directly. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Nathan, good morning. How can I help you on this beautiful Saturday? You know exactly why I'm calling, Patricia. Your contractor just buried my driveway under 4 feet of snow. I can't get my car out. This is deliberate harassment." "Oh my goodness, that is unfortunate. But you see, Nathan, the HOA is responsible for clearing communal areas, and the snow has to go somewhere. Your property just happens to be adjacent to one of those areas. I'm sure it wasn't personal. Every other house on this street has a clear driveway." The truck made multiple passes specifically targeting my property. I have video evidence. There was a pause, and when Patricia spoke again, her voice had lost its sugary tone. "Well, Nathan, if you have concerns about HOA operations, you're welcome to submit them in writing to the board. We meet in 3 weeks. Have a lovely day." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway, phone in hand, rage building in my chest. I had 2 options: spend the next several hours breaking my back to clear this snow myself or do something about it. That's when the idea hit me. If Patricia wanted to play games with snow removal, I could play too. The communal area she had mentioned was actually the main road that ran through the neighborhood. More specifically, it ran past my house and connected to the only exit from Meadowbrook Estates. The subdivision was designed with a single entrance and exit, a feature that had been marketed as exclusive and secure. But now, that design flaw was going to work in my favor. I went back inside, changed into proper winter gear, and made myself a substantial breakfast. I was going to need the energy. Then I spent an hour researching property lines, easements, and Minnesota snow removal laws on my laptop. What I discovered was interesting. While the HOA was responsible for clearing communal roads, property owners were not required to accept snow dumped on their property. Furthermore, I had every right to relocate snow that was on my property, provided I placed it within my own property boundaries. Around 9 in the morning, I started my project. Using a snow shovel, I began the laborious process of moving the massive pile of snow from my driveway. But instead of pushing it to the sides like a normal person would, I carefully constructed a wall. I built it right along my property line, which happened to run parallel to the main road, just 3 feet from the asphalt. The first hour was brutal. My shoulders ached, my hands were getting blisters even through my gloves, and the temperature was barely above 15 degrees. But I kept at it, methodically shaping and packing the snow into a solid barrier. I had taken surveying in college as an elective, and I used that knowledge now, checking my property markers to ensure I stayed within legal boundaries. By noon, I had made significant progress. The wall was about 3 feet high and extended about 20 feet along the road. A few neighbors had come out to watch, curious about what I was doing. Mrs. Chen from across the street brought me a thermos of hot coffee. "Nathan, what are you building?" she asked, her elderly face creased with concern. "Just moving snow off my property, Mrs. Chen. Thanks for the coffee. That Patricia, she is not a nice woman. She gave my son a violation for parking his car on the street overnight when he visited for Thanksgiving." "The street? Where else was he supposed to park?" I nodded sympathetically and continued working. Word was spreading through the neighborhood. By 2 in the afternoon, I had a small audience. Some people looked amused, others concerned. One couple, the Johnsons, actively encouraged me. "Give her hell, Nathan," Mr. Johnson called out. "That woman fined us $300 because our Christmas decorations were up 2 days past the January 10th deadline." 2 days. The wall grew taller and longer. I discovered that the compacted snow from the plow was actually perfect for construction. It held together well, and I could stack it high. By 4 in the afternoon, as the sun was beginning to set, my wall stretched 40 feet along the road and stood nearly 6 feet tall in some places. More importantly, it completely blocked the exit from Meadowbrook Estates. Anyone could still enter the neighborhood, but leaving was impossible unless you wanted to ram through a wall of packed snow. The HOA's single exit design had become a trap of their own making. I was exhausted but satisfied, admiring my handiwork from my front porch with a hot chocolate in hand when Patricia's silver Cadillac came speeding down the street. She slammed on her brakes when she reached my house, her car skidding slightly on the icy road. She got out, her face already purple with rage. "Nathan Vickers, what have you done?" "Good evening, Patricia. I'm just clearing snow off my property. You know, taking care of my responsibilities as a homeowner." "You've blocked the road. This is vandalism. This is destruction of HOA property." "Actually, Patricia, the snow is on my property. I checked the survey maps. My property line extends right to where that wall stands. I'm not blocking the road, I'm just managing snow on my own land. You can't just build a wall of snow. Sure I can. I looked it up. Minnesota law is very clear. Property owners can manage snow on their property as they see fit, as long as they don't create hazards on public or communal property. This wall is entirely on my land. Patricia's hands were shaking, whether from cold or rage I couldn't tell. This is deliberate obstruction. You're trapping the entire neighborhood. Am I? Or did the HOA create this situation by dumping all the communal snow onto my property? Because I have time-stamped video of your contractor deliberately targeting my driveway this morning. Multiple passes, Patricia. Very deliberate. I'll have it removed immediately from my property. I don't think so. That would be trespassing. And you'll need my written permission to access my land with any equipment. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. You're insane. People need to leave the neighborhood. What if there's an emergency? Then maybe the HOA should have thought about that before burying my driveway. Emergency services can still get in, just not out. But really, Patricia, I'm sure this is all just an unfortunate situation. The snow had to go somewhere, right? That's what you told me this morning. Patricia stood there for a long moment, her breath creating clouds in the frigid air. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she kept gesturing angrily at my snow wall. After about 5 minutes, she stomped back to her car and drove away, back toward her house, which was, conveniently, at the entrance side of the neighborhood. I went inside, took a long hot shower, and made dinner. My phone had been buzzing with messages. Some neighbors were angry, demanding I take down the wall immediately. Others were cheering me on, sharing their own horror stories about Patricia and the HOA board. One message caught my attention. It was from Sandra Wright, a lawyer who lived 4 houses down. Nathan, this is Sandra. I've been watching what you did today. I think it's brilliant and technically legal from what I can see. Patricia just sent out an emergency email calling for a special HOA board meeting tomorrow at 1 p.m. at the community center. She's going to try to fine you and force you to remove the wall. I'd be happy to represent you pro bono. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that woman. Call me. I called her immediately. Sandra turned out to be in her late 40s, with a sharp mind and a deep dislike for Patricia that stemmed from years of petty tyranny. She explained that Patricia had been HOA president for 7 years and ran the board like her personal fiefdom. The other board members, William Morrison and Deborah Sheffield, were basically rubber stamps who agreed with whatever Patricia wanted. The problem is that Patricia doesn't actually follow proper procedure half the time, Sandra explained. She issues fines without proper documentation, she makes decisions without board votes, and she definitely plays favorites. I've been collecting evidence for a while, but I haven't had the right moment to act. This might be it. We talked for over an hour, developing a strategy. Sandra would attend the meeting as my representative. She advised me to document everything, keep all communications in writing, and under no circumstances should I remove the snow wall until we had this resolved properly. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. I had spent 8 months being harassed by Patricia, receiving violation notices for absurd reasons, being fined for made-up infractions, and watching her treat my neighbors the same way. The snow wall was petty, sure, but sometimes petty is exactly what's needed. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold. More snow had fallen overnight, adding another 2 inches to the landscape. I went outside to check my wall and found it had actually grown more solid overnight as the snow had frozen. Several cars were lined up on the interior side of the neighborhood, their owners staring at the obstruction with a mixture of frustration and amusement. One man, someone I didn't recognize, approached me as I was inspecting my work. "Hey, man, I've got to get to work. Night shift at the hospital. Can you please move this?" I felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, truly, but I've got a meeting with the HOA today. This should be resolved soon. Can you call in and explain the situation?" He looked frustrated but nodded. "Yeah, I guess, but this is crazy, you know that, right?" "I know. But sometimes crazy is the only response to crazy." The meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m. at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that hosted HOA meetings and the occasional birthday party. I arrived at 12:45 with Sandra. The parking lot was already full, unusual for an HOA meeting which typically drew maybe 10 people. Inside, the main room was packed. Easily 60 or 70 residents had showed up, which was remarkable considering the neighborhood only had about 90 homes. Patricia sat at a table at the front with William and Deborah, looking smug despite the chaos I had created. When she saw me enter with Sandra, her expression soured. "Let's get started," Patricia announced loudly, banging a gavel on the table. "We're here to address the situation created by Nathan Vickers, who has deliberately and maliciously blocked the neighborhood exit with a wall of snow." Several people shouted in agreement. Others remained silent. I noticed Mrs. Chen and the Johnsons sitting in the front row, looking supportive. Patricia continued, "Mr. Vickers has violated HOA Covenants Section 12, Paragraph 4, which prohibits any structure or barrier that impedes communal access. I'm proposing an immediate fine of $5,000 and a mandate that he remove the wall within 24 hours or face additional daily fines of $500. "Point of order," Sandra stood up, her voice clear and authoritative. "Patricia, you can't just propose fines without following proper procedure. According to the HOA bylaws, any fine over $500 requires a full board vote, advance written notice to the homeowner, and an opportunity for the homeowner to present a defense." Patricia's face tightened. "This is an emergency situation, Sandra. The bylaws allow for emergency measures. Emergency measures allow for immediate action to prevent harm or damage. Nathan's snow wall doesn't qualify. It's an inconvenience, not an emergency. And you certainly can't impose a $5,000 fine without due process." Several residents began murmuring. William Morrison, a thin man in his 60s, leaned over to whisper something to Patricia. She waved him off impatiently. "Fine," Patricia snapped. "Then let's hear from Mr. Vickers. Explain yourself." I stood up, feeling dozens of eyes on me. "Yesterday morning at approximately 6 a.m., an HOA contractor deliberately plowed all the communal snow onto my driveway. Not near it, not beside it, directly onto it. 4 feet of compacted snow that completely blocked my garage and my ability to leave my property. I have video evidence of this, which shows the plow making multiple targeted passes." I held up my phone, and Sandra took it, connecting it to the community center's TV. The video played, showing exactly what I had described. The room erupted in conversation. Several people started shouting questions at Patricia. "Why would you do that to Nathan's property? Is this retaliation for his complaint about the fence violation? I got plowed in 2 last month." Patricia banged her gavel. "Order. The contractor was clearing communal areas as required. Where he places the snow is his professional judgment. Except that my driveway was the only one affected," I said calmly. "Every other house on my street was left clear. This was targeted harassment in retaliation for my filing a complaint against a bogus violation notice." "That's slander," Patricia shouted. It's defamation if it's written, and it's only actionable if it's false, Sandra interjected smoothly. Nathan has evidence supporting his claim. Now, let's address the actual issue. Nathan removed snow from his property and placed it along his property line. He has every legal right to manage snow on his land. The fact that this happens to block the exit is a consequence of the HOA's poor planning and the deliberate targeting of his property. Deborah Sheffield, a nervous woman in her 50s who had been silent until now, raised her hand timidly. Patricia, maybe we should just apologize to Nathan and have the contractor clear his driveway properly. Then he could remove the wall and we can all move on. It was a reasonable suggestion, probably the best solution, but Patricia's pride wouldn't allow it. Absolutely not. We're not going to be blackmailed by a homeowner throwing a tantrum. The wall comes down or the fines stand. Then I guess we're at an impasse, I said. Because I'm not removing the wall until the HOA formally apologizes, reimburses me for my time and labor clearing your snow, and agrees to implement a policy preventing this kind of targeting in the future. The room exploded into arguments. Neighbors were yelling at each other, at Patricia, at me. Some demanded I take down the wall immediately. Others supported my stance. One woman stood up and shared that Patricia had fined her $800 for having a garden gnome that was apparently too whimsical for the neighborhood aesthetic standards. Sandra let the chaos continue for a few minutes, then stood up and raised her voice. Everyone, please, let's approach this rationally. The board needs to vote on any formal action, so let's have that vote. All in favor of fining Nathan Vickers $5,000, say aye. Patricia said aye immediately. William hesitated, looking uncomfortable, then mumbled aye. Deborah looked between them, then at the crowd, and said nothing. Deborah, your vote, Patricia demanded. I don't think we should fine him. This whole situation is our fault. The contractor should never have buried his driveway like that. Patricia's face went from red to nearly purple. You're voting against me. I'm voting for what's right, Patricia, and this isn't right. The motion failed, 2-1. Patricia looked like she might explode. Sandra pressed the advantage. Now, I'd like to make a motion that the board formally apologize to Nathan Vickers and reimburse him $200 for his labor in clearing snow that was improperly placed on his property. Seconded, Deborah said immediately. The vote was called. Deborah voted yes. William, looking miserable, voted yes. Patricia voted no, but she was outvoted. The motion passed. Furthermore, Sandra continued, I move that the board conduct a comprehensive review of all violation notices issued in the past 2 years to ensure they comply with proper procedures and are actually supported by the covenants. That's ridiculous, Patricia shouted. We don't have time for that. Then maybe you shouldn't have been so trigger-happy with violations, Mr. Johnson called out from the audience. This motion also passed, 2-1. Patricia was visibly shaking now. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her papers. This is absurd. I'm done with this meeting. Patricia, you can't just leave, William said weakly. We're not finished. Watch me. She stormed out, leaving William and Deborah staring at each other in shock. Sandra took control. Okay, William, as vice president, you're now running this meeting. Let's talk about immediate next steps. Nathan, will you remove the wall if the HOA clears your driveway properly and provides the formal apology? Absolutely. That's all I wanted in the first place. William nodded gratefully. We'll have a contractor out first thing tomorrow morning. We'll make sure your driveway is completely clear, and we'll send a formal letter of apology. I'm sorry about all this, Nathan. It got way out of hand. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to Patricia. Mrs. Chen hugged me. The hospital worker from that morning approached and apologized for being short with me, explaining he understood now that this was about more than just snow. I went home feeling vindicated but also exhausted. The drama had been intense, and while I had won this battle, I suspected the war with Patricia wasn't over. Monday morning arrived with surprising promptness. At 7 a.m., a different contractor showed up with a small bobcat loader. He was professional and courteous, introducing himself as Miguel and explaining that he had been contracted to clear my driveway completely and help me remove the snow wall. "Between you and me," Miguel said with a grin, "what you did was legendary. That lady, Patricia, she treats contractors like dirt. Yells at us, demands impossible things, refuses to pay proper rates. I only took this job because William called me personally and apologized for the mess. Together, we spent 2 hours clearing everything." Miguel expertly moved the snow wall to proper locations along the street, and he cleared my driveway down to the bare pavement. He even salted it for me. By 9:30, the neighborhood exit was clear, and several cars that had been waiting immediately left for work or errands. I tried to tip Miguel, but he refused. "Man, you gave me the best story I've had in years. I'm going to be telling people about the snow wall fortress for months." True to their word, that afternoon I received a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by William and Deborah, but notably not by Patricia. It contained a genuine apology and a check for $200. The letter also informed me that Patricia had resigned as president effective immediately, citing personal reasons. I felt a moment of satisfaction, then concern. Patricia didn't seem like the type to just quit. She was more likely to go down fighting. My instinct was correct. 2 days later, on Wednesday evening, I received a certified letter. It was from Patricia personally, not from the HOA. Inside was a lawsuit notice. She was suing me for $5,000 in damages, claiming that my snow wall had caused her severe emotional distress, had damaged the HOA's reputation, and had violated my contract with the association. She was also suing the HOA itself for wrongful termination, claiming that William and Deborah had forced her resignation. I immediately called Sandra, who laughed when I told her. "Of course she did. Patricia is nothing if not predictable. Don't worry, this lawsuit is garbage." Emotional distress requires proof of severe psychological harm, which she won't have. You didn't violate any contracts, we established that. And she wasn't terminated, she resigned. But we should take it seriously. Let me handle it. Over the next few weeks, the lawsuit moved forward slowly. Sandra filed responses to all of Patricia's claims, and she countersued on my behalf for harassment and abuse of HOA authority. More interestingly, once word got out about the lawsuit, other neighbors started coming forward with their own complaints about Patricia. Mrs. Chen had been fined repeatedly for having her grandchildren's toys visible in her yard. The Johnsons had documentation of over 15 bogus violations in 3 years. The woman with the garden gnome had a recording of Patricia screaming at her during a confrontation. Sandra compiled everything into a comprehensive case, showing a pattern of abuse and misuse of authority. The HOA's insurance company got involved, and their lawyers were not happy with Patricia. They discovered that she had been issuing fines without proper board approval and had been depositing some of the money into accounts that she controlled. It wasn't a huge amount, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 over the years, but it was clear financial impropriety. That's when things got serious. William, now serving as interim HOA president, reported the financial irregularities to the Rochester Police Department. 2 detectives came to interview me and several other neighbors. They were thorough and professional, taking statements and collecting documentation. One detective, a woman named Officer Torres, seemed particularly interested in the timeline of events. So, let me get this straight. She had the contractor bury your driveway in retaliation for you filing a complaint. Then, when you built the wall, she tried to fine you $5,000 without following proper procedures. And now, we're discovering she's been embezzling HOA funds. That's about the size of it, I confirmed. Though I didn't know about the embezzlement until recently. Classic escalation of abusive behavior, Officer Torres said. People who engage in this kind of petty tyranny often have other issues. They start with power trips and move into more serious misconduct. The investigation took about 3 weeks. During that time, life in Meadowbrook Estates was strange. Patricia was still living in the neighborhood, but she rarely came out of her house. When she did, neighbors either ignored her or glared at her openly. The new board, led by William with Deborah and a newly elected member named Richard, was working to repair the damage she had done. They sent letters to every homeowner who had been fined in the past 2 years, offering to review the violations and refund any improper fines. They implemented new policies requiring transparency in decision-making and limiting the authority of any single board member. They even hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations, removing the personal element that had allowed Patricia to run wild. In mid-March, about 6 weeks after the snow wall incident, Officer Torres called me. "Nathan, I wanted to let you know that we're filing charges against Patricia Hendricks. We've documented embezzlement of approximately $4,200 in HOA funds over a 4-year period. We're also charging her with filing a false police report." False police report? Yeah. During the snow wall incident, she called 911 and claimed you had threatened her with violence and were holding the neighborhood hostage. The call logs show she made the report, but she never mentioned it in her lawsuit or any other documentation. She was trying to get you arrested. Fortunately, the responding officer recognized it as a civil dispute and didn't take action, but filing a false emergency report is a crime. I felt a chill run down my spine. Patricia had been willing to try to get me arrested over this. What happens now? She'll be arraigned next week. Given the amounts involved and her lack of criminal history, she'll probably get a plea deal. Restitution, probation, community service, maybe a short jail sentence. But she'll have a criminal record, and her ability to serve on any HOA board or similar position will be effectively ended. The arraignment was indeed the following week. Sandra attended on my behalf since I was named in some of the documentation. Patricia appeared with her own lawyer, a tired-looking man who seemed overwhelmed by his client. She pleaded not guilty to all charges, and a trial date was set for May. Patricia's lawsuit against me was quietly dropped in April. Her lawyer withdrew from that case, and she didn't find a replacement willing to take it on. The evidence against her claims was too strong, and Sandra's countersuit was too well documented. My legal fees were covered by the HOA's insurance, which also settled with several other neighbors who had been similarly harassed. The criminal trial in May was anticlimactic. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including bank records showing the embezzled funds and recordings of the false police report, Patricia changed her plea to guilty as part of a deal. She was sentenced to 90 days in county jail, suspended to 30 days with work release, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA plus fines. She was also permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Minnesota. During the sentencing hearing, the judge had some pointed words. "Miss Hendricks, you were entrusted with a position of leadership in your community. Instead of serving your neighbors, you abused your authority, harassed residents, and stole from the association. Your behavior toward Mr. Vickers was particularly egregious, using HOA resources to engage in personal retaliation. This kind of petty tyranny has no place in civil society. I hope you use your time in custody to reflect on your actions and the harm you've caused." Patricia said nothing, staring straight ahead with a rigid expression. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Life in Meadowbrook Estates gradually returned to normal over the summer. The new HOA board was responsive and reasonable. They fixed long neglected common areas, negotiated better rates with contractors, and actually listened to homeowner concerns. Several of the ridiculous rules that Patricia had implemented were repealed, including the restriction on garden gnomes and the absurdly specific Christmas decoration timeline. Mrs. Chen got her grandchildren's toys back in the yard. The Johnsons put up their Christmas lights whenever they wanted. I even installed a new fence, properly measured and approved, without any hassle. The snow wall became something of a legend in Rochester HOA circles. I heard from friends that it was being discussed in other neighborhoods as an example of creative resistance to HOA overreach. A local news station even did a story about it, though they kept my name anonymous at my request. The headline was, "Rochester Man Blocks HOA Exit with Snow Wall After Retaliation, Leads to President's Arrest." One Saturday in August, I was doing yard work when William walked over. He had a sheepish expression on his face. "Nathan, I owe you an apology. A real one, not just an HOA letter. I knew Patricia was out of control for years, but I didn't have the courage to stand up to her. You did what I should have done a long time ago. Thank you for that." I stopped raking and considered his words. "William, I appreciate that, but why didn't you say something? You were on the board with her." He sighed, looking older than his years. "Honestly, I was afraid. Patricia had a way of making your life miserable if you crossed her. She threatened to sue me personally a few times when I questioned her decisions, and I convinced myself that it was easier to just go along. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry." "Well, you stood up when it counted. That meeting where you backed Deborah's vote, that took guts, I guess. But it shouldn't have taken someone building a snow wall to make me find my spine." We talked for a while longer about the changes in the neighborhood and how much better things were. William mentioned that attendance at HOA meetings had actually increased because people felt like their voices mattered now. Community events were better attended. People were friendlier. It was amazing how much one toxic person could poison an entire community, and how quickly things could improve once that toxin was removed. In September, I attended an HOA meeting, my first since the snow wall incident. The community center was about half full, a healthy turnout. The meeting was efficient and productive. They discussed plans for fall maintenance, reviewed the budget, and addressed a few minor homeowner concerns. No yelling, no arbitrary fines, no drama. Afterward, Sandra approached me with a smile. "You know, Nathan, you've become something of a folk hero around here. People call you the snow wall guy," I laughed. "I'm not sure that's the legacy I was hoping for, but I'll take it. Seriously, though, what you did mattered. You stood up to a bully, and you did it in a way that exposed a whole system of corruption and abuse. A lot of people in this neighborhood are grateful. I just wanted to clear my driveway. Maybe, but sometimes the small acts of resistance are the ones that create real change." I thought about that a lot over the following months. The snow wall had been a petty act, born out of frustration and anger, but it had sparked something bigger. It had given other people the courage to speak up about their own experiences. It had forced the community to confront the dysfunction in their HOA. And ultimately, It had led to real consequences for someone who had been abusing power for years. Winter came around again, and with it, snow. This time, when the HOA contractor came through, he carefully plowed around driveways, pushing the snow to proper collection points. No one's property was targeted. No one's access was blocked. It was how snow removal should work in a functional community. I was in my garage one Saturday morning in December, organizing tools when I heard a knock on the open door. I turned to see Patricia standing there. I hadn't seen her since the trial, and the change in her was striking. She looked older, tired, diminished somehow. The aggressive confidence that had defined her was gone. "Nathan, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I wanted to talk to you if you have a minute." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, but curiosity won out. "Okay." She stepped just inside the garage, staying near the entrance as if ready to flee. I wanted to apologize. A real apology, not a court-ordered one. What I did to you was wrong. The snow, the fines, trying to get you arrested, all of it. I let my ego and my need for control turn me into a terrible person. I didn't say anything, just waited. I've been in therapy since the trial. Court-ordered at first, but I kept going because I needed to understand why I acted that way. My therapist thinks I was using the HOA as a way to exert control because I felt powerless in other areas of my life. My marriage was failing, my kids don't talk to me, I hated my job, so I took it out on the neighborhood. That's not an excuse, Patricia. I know, it's not. There is no excuse. I hurt people, I broke the law, and I destroyed my own life in the process. I just wanted you to know that I understand that now, and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of what I did to you. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, that snow wall was brilliant. It was the perfect response to my bullying. I hate that it took that to make me face what I had become, but I'm glad it happened. Thank you for standing up to me when no one else would. Then she left, walking back down my driveway to her car. I watched her go, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at what she had put me through, sympathy for someone who had clearly been struggling, satisfaction that she had been held accountable, and a strange sort of gratitude that the whole mess had actually worked out. I never spoke to Patricia again. She moved out of Meadowbrook Estates a few months later, selling her house and relocating to somewhere in Iowa to be near her sister. The neighborhood continued to thrive under competent leadership. Property values actually increased once word got out that the HOA was reasonable and well managed. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons from the experience. I learned that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. I learned that creative resistance can be more effective than direct confrontation. I learned that communities are stronger when people have the courage to speak up about injustice. And I learned that a snow wall, built in anger on a freezing Minnesota morning, could become a symbol of resistance against petty tyranny. The following winter, on the anniversary of the snow wall incident, Mrs. Chen organized a neighborhood party. She called it the Snow Wall Festival, and about 40 residents showed up. We had hot chocolate, winter games, and a snow sculpture contest. Someone built a miniature replica of my famous wall, complete with a tiny flag on top. During the party, William made a short speech. 1 year ago, our community was in a bad place. We had a leader who abused her authority, residents who were afraid to speak up, and a culture of fear and harassment. One man, armed with nothing but a snow shovel and justified anger, changed all that. Nathan's snow wall was ridiculous and petty and absolutely necessary. It reminded us that we have the power to stand up to injustice, even in small ways. So here's to Nathan, to snow walls, and to having the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. Everyone cheered, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride. It was absurd to be celebrated for building a wall of snow, but I understood what it represented to these people. It represented resistance. It represented standing up for yourself. It represented the idea that ordinary people could fight back against petty tyrants and win. Later that evening, as the party was winding down and neighbors were heading home, Sandra pulled me aside. "You know, Nathan, I've been practicing law for 23 years, and this is one of my favorite cases ever. Not because of the legal complexity or the money involved, but because it mattered. It actually improved people's lives. That's rare. I'm glad something good came out of it. It could have just been a stupid snow fight. It was a stupid snow fight. But stupid snow fights can sometimes change the world, or at least one neighborhood in Rochester, Minnesota." I laughed, looking around at my neighbors enjoying themselves, kids playing in the snow, adults laughing and talking without the shadow of HOA intimidation hanging over them. The community center lights were warm against the dark winter evening, and for the first time since I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates, the neighborhood felt like home. The snow wall was long melted, of course, but its impact remained. The new HOA board had established clear policies against retaliation, created transparent procedures for violations and fines, and implemented a homeowner bill of rights that protected residents from arbitrary decisions. They had also created an ombudsman position, filled by a volunteer resident who could advocate for homeowners in disputes with the board. These changes had ripple effects beyond our neighborhood. Other HOAs in Rochester reached out to learn about our reforms. William and Deborah gave presentations at a regional HOA conference about good governance and avoiding the pitfalls that had nearly destroyed Meadowbrook Estates. Sandra wrote an article for a legal journal about HOA abuse and the importance of checks and balances in neighborhood governance. As for me, I just enjoyed living in my house without constantly worrying about bogus violation notices. I could park my car without fear of arbitrary fines. I could decorate for holidays on my own schedule. I could enjoy my property without someone looking for reasons to harass me. It was amazing how much energy I had wasted over those first 8 months, constantly on guard against Patricia's next attack. My favorite moment came the following spring when I decided to plant a garden in my front yard. Nothing elaborate, just some vegetables and flowers. Under Patricia's reign, this would have triggered multiple violation notices about unapproved landscaping, visual harmony with the neighborhood, and probably some made-up regulation about vegetable gardens being prohibited in front yards. Instead, William walked by while I was planting and stopped to chat. "That's going to look great, Nathan. What are you planting?" "Tomatoes, peppers, some herbs, and those flowers there are black-eyed Susans." "Nice. Hey, if you get a good tomato harvest, let me know. My wife loves fresh tomatoes." That was it. No violation notice. No demand to submit landscaping plans for approval. Just a normal conversation between neighbors. It was glorious. Over time, the Snow Wall Festival became an annual tradition. Each winter, on the last Saturday of January, the neighborhood would gather for hot chocolate and snow activities. Someone would always build a replica of the wall, and new residents would hear the story of what had happened. It became part of the community's identity, a reminder of what they had overcome and what they had become. I sometimes wondered if I had overreacted that morning when I woke up to find my driveway buried. Could I have handled it differently, maybe more diplomatically? Probably. But would it have had the same result? I don't think so. Patricia had been entrenched in power for years, and diplomatic approaches had failed repeatedly. Sometimes, you need a dramatic action to break through the status quo and force change. The snow wall was that dramatic action. It was visible, it was disruptive, and it was perfectly calibrated to expose the hypocrisy and pettiness of Patricia's leadership. She had dumped snow on my property as retaliation, so I used that snow to create consequences for the entire community. Those consequences forced people to pay attention, to take sides, to finally confront the dysfunction they had been tolerating for years. In that sense, the snow wall was more than just petty revenge. It was strategic activism. It was using the tools and materials at hand to create leverage and force a reckoning. And it worked better than I could have imagined. Years later, I still live in Meadowbrook Estates. The house that I bought on a whim has become a true home, surrounded by a community that learned hard lessons about governance, accountability, and standing up to bullies. My driveway gets plowed properly every winter. I've never received another bogus violation notice. And I have good relationships with my neighbors, built on mutual respect rather than fear of HOA retaliation. Sometimes, when I'm shoveling snow from my driveway on a cold Minnesota morning, I think about that day when I built the wall. I remember the physical exhaustion, the anger that fueled each shovelful, the satisfaction of watching it grow taller and more imposing. I remember the look on Patricia's face when she realized what I had done. I remember the moment at the HOA meeting when Deborah found the courage to vote against Patricia's fine. I remember Officer Torres telling me that charges were being filed. Each of those moments was part of a larger story, a story about what happens when ordinary people decide they have had enough of petty tyranny and fight back in creative ways. My snow wall was absurd and juvenile and legally questionable, but it was also effective and necessary, and ultimately justice served cold in the best possible way. And if that makes me the snow wall guy, if that's my legacy in this neighborhood, then I'm perfectly fine with that. Because the snow wall represented something important, the idea that you don't have to accept injustice, even when it comes from someone with official authority. You can fight back. You can resist. You can build barriers against those who try to bury you. Sometimes those barriers are made of snow. Sometimes they are made of courage, documentation, and community support. But they all serve the same purpose: protecting yourself and others from those who abuse power. So here I am, still in Rochester, still in Meadowbrook Estates, still shoveling snow when needed but never having it deliberately dumped on my property again. I have a good life, good neighbors, and a good story to tell. The HOA is well managed and responsive. The community is healthy and engaged. And somewhere in Iowa, Patricia Hendricks is hopefully learning to be a better person. The snow wall lasted only a few days before it melted into memory. But the impact of those frozen 3 days changed everything, transforming a toxic neighborhood into a thriving community where people actually want to live. And that, more than any legal victory or personal vindication, is what makes the whole crazy experience worthwhile. Every winter, when the first snow falls, I look out my window at my driveway and smile. I think about what happened, about how a simple act of creative resistance sparked a revolution in my neighborhood. I think about all the people who found their voices because I found mine. And I think about the power we all have, if we are willing to use it, to stand up against injustice in whatever form it takes. Even if that form is an HOA president with too much authority and not enough accountability. Even if the weapon is nothing more than a snow shovel and justified anger. Even if the battlefield is a suburban driveway in Rochester, Minnesota. Because sometimes the most important fights are the small ones, fought by ordinary people who simply refuse to accept being treated unfairly. Those are the fights that change communities, that inspire others, that remind us all that we have more power than we think. That is the legacy of the snow wall, and I carry it with pride.